Picture a soda company sitting across from the Soviet Union, negotiating the ownership of 17 warships. Submarines, a cruiser, a frigate, a destroyer. That is not a punchline. It happened, and it is the last thing you will hear in this video, because in a list built entirely on lies people still believe, it is the one story that is completely verifiably true. 7 historical lies ranked from mildly embarrassing to genuinely difficult to explain at dinner parties. And it starts with a warrior whose honor code was considerably louder than you were told. Point number 7, samurai loved guns. You know the image. Stoic warrior, cherry blossoms in slow motion, an honor blade polished for 40 years. The entire aesthetic is built on the premise that these men were the ultimate anti-gun philosophers. Warriors who would rather lose a limb than touch a firearm. A beautiful story for people who do not understand how warfare works, completely made up.
The warrior who refuses superior technology is, in classical terms, a figure of tragedy. The Greeks wrote plays about this. They were considerably shorter than the films.
When Portuguese traders arrived in Japan in 1543 carrying matchlock muskets, the samurai did not recoil in horror. They grabbed the guns, reverse-engineered them, and were mass-producing their own versions within a decade. Japanese gunsmiths got so efficient that by the late 1500s, Japan had one of the highest concentrations of firearms on the planet, more than most of Europe, a continent that had been shooting at itself for centuries. Warlord Oda Nobunaga built his entire military strategy around organized gunfire formations. He used them to obliterate the cavalry that his opponents were still riding into battle like it was the 12th century. So where does the myth come from? After Japan unified, the Tokugawa government restricted firearms to prevent rebellion. The sword survived not as a battlefield weapon but as a symbol of status, a controlled object in a controlled peace. Then centuries passed. Then, a single Hollywood film took that government gun control policy, stripped it of all political context, and calcified it into a cultural myth so thoroughly that people defend samurai honor in comment sections today on behalf of men who would have absolutely shot them. The samurai did not reject guns. The government confiscated them. That distinction just fell on your brain like a very heavy cherry blossom. Number 6 is built on a single Latin word that has been misread for 500 years. And has produced a spectacularly disgusting misunderstanding about Roman dinner parties. Point number 6, Roman vomitoriums. The popular version, wealthy Romans ate beyond capacity. Excused themselves to a dedicated purging chamber built into the villa's floor plan, emptied themselves, and returned to eat more. An entire room, architecturally planned, constructed from marble, maintained by staff, designed for the midpoint of digestion. Pause. Apply basic logic. Imagine hiring an architect, commissioning a room, sourcing the marble, and explaining to every tradesman involved that the purpose of this space is vomiting. Imagine them nodding and continuing. Imagine returning to the dinner table afterwards as though nothing had occurred. The word exists. It comes from the Latin vomere, to spew forth. But what it describes is not a digestive strategy. It is a passageway. The exit corridors of Roman amphitheaters, tunnels through which 50,000 spectators were spewed out of the Colosseum in roughly 15 minutes. Remarkable civil engineering, nothing to do with dinner.
I spent 3 years cataloguing Roman egress structures before concluding that the vomitorium and the triclinium share a more profound spiritual kinship than the literature admits. My committee disagreed. Committees always do.
The myth was built by later writers who found the word, stripped it from context, and handed it to subsequent generations as proof that Romans were magnificently depraved. The dedicated purge suite between the atrium and the shame is a fiction built entirely on a misread noun. Number 5 is about beauty, and about how an accident of weather destroyed an aesthetic that the people who actually created it would not recognize. Point number 5, Greek statues were painted in vivid colors. Beauty. Your entire conception of classical elegance, cool white marble, serene faces, pure proportion, is an accident of erosion. You have been looking at Greek statues wrong for your entire life, and so has every art movement that worshipped them for 5 centuries. The Greeks painted their statues, not subtly. They applied vivid reds, electric blues, deep yellows, hair painted black or auburn, colored irises, painted lips, warriors in patterned armor, goddesses in robes that would physically alarm you at a parade. We know this because ultraviolet pigment analysis reveals chemical traces of paint in the microscopic grooves that carving tools left behind. The pigment is gone. The molecular signature is not. Renaissance scholars dug these works up after 1,000 years underground, found bare marble, and instead of concluding the paint had not survived, decided the Greeks were minimalists. They then built an entire aesthetic philosophy around that conclusion, exported it across 5 centuries of Western art and architecture, convinced entire civilizations that white marble represented the pinnacle of human beauty, and never once stopped to ask whether a millennium of rain might have had something to do with the color situation. The Venus de Milo had painted eyes. She looked directly at people. Sit with that while every art history textbook quietly sweats.
The Greeks would not have called them white nor statues. The correct term, per Winkelmann's lesser-read appendices, is arrested citizens. This has not entered the curriculum. The curriculum is the poorer for it.
Point number 4. World War I. The winners wrote the verdict. The Great War. Germany started World War I. Your education was very confident about this. The Treaty of Versailles was legally confident, specifically Article 231, the War Guilt Clause, which assigned sole responsibility to Germany and its allies. Clean, signed, legally binding. A judgment delivered by the victors to the defeated, which migrated directly into the textbooks your teachers used and the textbooks their teachers used before them. The most successful piece of historical misdirection in the modern era, and not the full story. France was engineering revenge and funding Russian expansion. Russia mobilized first, mechanically forcing everyone else's hand. Britain performed neutrality while making secret naval commitments. Austria-Hungary wrote an ultimatum designed to be rejected. Serbia's Black Hand organized the assassination that lit the match. 5 countries, 5 deliberate triggers. 1 catastrophic explosion, wherein 1 treaty that needed a single name on the bill. Germany deserves blame. The blank check to Austria was reckless. The invasion of Belgium was deliberate. But Kaiser Wilhelm as the singular villain is a story engineered after the armistice, not before it. The Allied powers needed the guilt clause to justify reparations that would economically strangle Germany for a generation. They needed 1 bad guy to sign for the bill. They had won the war. They wrote the verdict. They printed it in every language, bound it in covers, and handed it to 8-year-olds as established fact, because a multiple-choice test is considerably easier to grade when there is only 1 correct answer and 1 acceptable villain. The propaganda did not end when the fighting stopped. It became the official record. The official record became the textbook. The textbook became what you would have defended in a conversation an hour ago. Number 3 has a villain you have already pictured. It has a tail, and it has been taking the blame for something it mostly did not do. Point number 3. The Black Death wasn't the rats. For 6 centuries, the rat has been the official villain of the Black Death, the plague that killed roughly a third of Europe across the 14th century. The textbook story, infected fleas rode on rats, rats moved with merchant ships, fleas jumped to humans, humans died by the millions. The rat as an involuntary weapon of mass destruction, carrying a sentence it never received a trial for. Compelling story, does not fit the mathematics. Researchers from the University of Oslo modeled plague spread against historical death rates across European cities. The rat-based model did not fit the data. The outbreak moved too fast in some regions, too localized in others, exploding in patterns that rodent movement alone simply cannot explain. Rats travel, they do not teleport. The model that fit was human fleas and body lice, not an external animal importing the disease from the docks, but the parasites already living on the people, already in the city, already in the house, already in the bed. The mechanism was not the rats, it was people, your ancestors, passing it to each other in conditions the 14th century considered entirely normal. The rat was a bystander, humanity was the crime scene. Next time you see a rat in the subway, consider a small apology on behalf of your species. Number 2 is about a conquest that was taught as destiny. Someone built that story on purpose, and we know exactly who paid for it. Point number 2. Cortés was never mistaken for a god. Hernán Cortés lands in Mexico in 1519. Moctezuma II looks at this armored stranger arriving from the sea and concludes, based on a prophecy about the feathered serpent deity Quetzalcoatl, that this must be a god. He surrenders. The civilization falls. A theological accident written in the stars. A story almost entirely constructed by people who needed it to be true. The main source is Francisco López de Gómara, a man who never set foot in Mexico, wrote 20 years after the events, and was on the payroll of Cortés's own family. Not a historian, a 16th century publicist with a deadline and a client whose legacy needed protecting. Modern historians and indigenous scholars argue Moctezuma was a sophisticated political operator employing diplomatic delay, stalling while assessing an unknown threat, managing the Spanish through ceremony and negotiation. A brilliant man playing a very difficult hand with imperfect information against an enemy he had never encountered before. The myth was engineered to make the collapse of an entire civilization look like cosmic inevitability. Rather than a conquest enabled by disease, forced alliances, and industrial violence, useful myths do not die. They get published, they get taught, and 600 years later, they are still doing the work they were designed to do.
Retrospective inevitability is as old as Thucydides, who got several things wrong, knew it, and published regardless. One finds this oddly reassuring.
And number 1. Every lie on this list was told by governments, empires, or historians. Number 1 was told by a vending machine company, and it is the only story in this video that is completely, entirely, documentably true. Point number 1. Pepsi and the Cold War Lie. The lie is this, that the Cold War was fought exclusively by governments, militaries, and ideologies, by men in suits making decisions in rooms the public never saw. Number 1 is the proof that it was also fought by a soda company, and the soda company won. In 1959, Nixon and Khrushchev had their famous kitchen debate, capitalism versus communism, conducted in front of a model American kitchen at a Moscow trade fair. Standing nearby was PepsiCo executive Donald Kendall. He handed Khrushchev a Pepsi to de-escalate a geopolitical confrontation with carbonated sugar water. Khrushchev liked it. Kendall spent the next decade negotiating a deal to sell Pepsi inside the Soviet Union. By 1972, Pepsi became the first Western consumer product sold in the USSR. Problem: the Soviet ruble could not be converted to Western currency. So PepsiCo accepted Stolichnaya vodka in exchange, sold it in Western markets, a barter arrangement between a soda company and a nuclear superpower. It functioned smoothly for years. Then in 1989, the vodka deal collapsed. The Soviets had a different offer.
The Romans dissolved entire provinces through grain contracts. Commerce as geopolitics is not novel. It is merely, in this instance, carbonated.
17 warships, a cruiser, a frigate, a destroyer, several submarines. PepsiCo accepted. For one documented moment in history, a company best known for vending machines held paper ownership of a naval fleet larger than most sovereign nations maintain today, 6th largest navy on the planet. They outgunned a NATO member state, embarrassed the Pentagon, then contracted a Norwegian firm to scrap every vessel for parts and pocketed the proceeds. The Cold War was not only fought by governments, by generals, or by nuclear arsenals pointed at each other across an ocean. Sometimes the decisive move was made by someone whose only weapon was carbonated sugar water. Donald Kendall called the US National Security Council. What he said is documented. "We're disarming the Soviet Union faster than you are." And that is how spaghetti untangles a century of confident nonsense. History is mostly a negotiation between what happened and who was holding the pen afterwards. Sometimes the pen belongs to a soda company. Drop a comment. Which of these did you believe an hour ago? Full honesty earns partial credit. See you in the next episode.